Good evening, traveler. Set aside the noise of your day. Allow your shoulders to loosen and settle into stillness. With every slow breath, imagine a door creaking open onto the past, wrapped in candle glow, iron chill, and whispered hopes of turning common metal into gold. Tonight, we drift through the dim corridors of why you'd go mad in a medieval alchemist's lab. Across 4 unhurried chapters, we will first immerse ourselves in the droning routines of an apprentice alchemist, then follow those who sacrificed comfort, and sometimes reason, in pursuit of the legendary philosopher's stone. We will linger amid bottles of dust and curls of acrid smoke to ponder alchemy's lingering mysteries, and finally stroll into the palace halls, where nobles toyed with sorcery from a safe distance. There is no need to stay fully awake for every word. The rhythm of their lives, the measured scrape of mortar on stone, and the soft cadence of this narration will keep watch while you drift. Let the glow of modern lamplight around you contrast gently with the candlelit labor we are about to visit. Now, close the door to present worries and, if you are ready, step quietly into Segment 1. Segment 1. Why you'd go mad in a medieval alchemist's lab. Imagine yourself awakening on a straw pallet before dawn, somewhere in the late 14th century. The air is damp, laced with the lingering bite of vinegar and unfamiliar metallic notes. Above you, a vaulted ceiling disappears into shadow. Beneath you, the stone floor holds a chill that seeps through thin wool. Around the room, squat brick furnaces, their embers kept barely alive through the night, glowing like sleepy red eyes. A tallow candle flickers nearby, casting a wavering halo that touches shelves lined with earthenware flasks, horn-handled ladles, and stoppered bottles marked only with cryptic sigils. In this space, silence is never quite complete. Somewhere, a bellows exhales softly, and in the corner a slow drip, water condensing on cold copper, counts the moments like an unhurried metronome. Before the first light slants through the high arrow-slit window, your master expects the fire stoked and the glassware spotless. You rise, shake straw from your tunic, and pat across the flagstone. The hearth-spanked coals flare to life under practiced breaths from the bellows. Each inhale draws in traces of soot. Each exhale feeds a sleepy flame. You reach for the vinegar jar, its clay surface clammy against your fingers, and pour a thin stream into a wooden basin. A rain-quiet hush follows as you rinsed yesterday's alembic thin-necked vessels, clouded with the ghost of yesterday's experiments. Woolen cloth squeaks over glass, and somewhere deep in the room, the furnace ticks as fresh heat expands its bricks. This scrubbing is careful, almost ceremonial. A single unseen grit could crack an alembic at the day's first heating, and the master's displeasure would be swift and cold. The rhythm of their lives was repetition. Dip, wipe, polish. Again, grind, sift, weigh again. Next comes the mortar. A bowl of gray granite worn satin smooth by years of turning. Beside it rests a small pile of minerals. Malachite, the color of damp moss, cinnabar as red as ripe cherries, and dough lead scraped from old roof flashing. You ease yourself onto the low stool, brace the mortar, and begin. Scrape, press, circle. Each motion is deliberate and slow, designed not to hurry but to coax. Fine dust particles rise, carrying a faint mineral tang that prickles the back of your throat. You breathe through a scrap of linen, thin protection that does little more than remind you to inhale gently. An hour passes, maybe 2, and the candle gutters. Outside, sparrows have begun their tentative morning chatter, but inside, time is measured only by the changing texture beneath the pet. Finer, the master murmurs when he breezes past, voices cool as the stone walls. Finer still when the powder finally suits his eye. You transfer it to a brass scale, its pans polished to a muted glow. The tiny grains slide like sifting sand. A weight the size of a hazelnut settles on the opposite pan, and needles shiver toward balance. You lean closer, steady breath, and nudge a single motorway with a goose quill tip. Patience is not merely a virtue here, it is survival. All the while, the promise of gold remains nothing more than a rumor. You have never seen it conjured, only heard late-night tales whispered, tales of distant masters who glimpsed a shimmer, tales that keep weary hands moving. Midday brings a bowl of thin pea pottage and a crust of rye, eaten standing, so the master's instructions are never missed. Heat from the furnace bakes the pottage's faint aroma into the thick air. When the meal is done, you rinse the bowl with the same precious vinegar, ever mindful of contamination. A misflavored batch is a day of labor lost. Night returns in slow descent. The last distilling flask filled with rosin-scented distillate rests in a bath of sand too cool. Your fingers tingle from mercury's invisible touch. Your head feels cushioned and cotton from the sweet fumes of lead oxide. You spread your blanket once more beside the banked coals, soothed and yet imperiled by their warmth. Dreams arrive fitfully, punctuated by the hiss of cooling metal and the echo of words you have heard all day. Finer, slower, again, and so the rhythm continues, day upon day, season upon season, until the mind grows as numb as the fingers, and a search for transmutation blurs into a steady haze of vinegar, smoke, and grinding wheels. Breathe softly now. Feel the repetitive motions settle into a lullaby of motionless repose. As the ember glow of the furnace dims in your imagination, allow your thoughts to drift toward the shimmering promise that kept these apprentices at their benches, the elusive dream of gold. In our next chapter, we will meet one of the most determined seekers of that dream, Brand, whose pursuit of the philosopher's stone would draw him to the very edge of reason. Segment 2. The Gold That Never Came. Biography of obsession and quiet collapse. Brand and others who chased immortality through science cloaked in dreams. Now that you've settled into the steady rhythm of the Alchemist's lab, let us quietly follow the footsteps of one who pursued its promises further than most. Not a nameless apprentice this time, but a man of some ambition, some education, and ultimately, great disappointment. Tonight we trace the life of Brand, a man who sifted urine by the barrel and watched his fortunes dissolve drop by glowing drop, all in search of a golden secret. Imagine a quiet German port city in the middle of the 17th century. The houses are narrow and timber-framed, the streets cobbled and damp, ships moored just beyond, their hulls creaking against the tide. This is Homburg, and it is here that Brand begins, not as a mystic, but as a tradesman, a merchant by profession, familiar with bookkeeping and modest profit margins. But the world is changing. The great wars of religion have recently cooled. Scientific curiosity, new and still fragile, is just beginning to stir. Alchemy, still respected by some and ridiculed by others, lies at the uncertain border between mysticism and chemistry. And Brand, recently widowed and suddenly in possession of his wife's inheritance, turns his gaze away from the ledger and toward the laboratory. His goal is the same as countless others before him: to discover the philosopher's stone, the substance said to transform base metals into gold, to cure disease, and even to extend life itself. But Brand's methods are uniquely unpleasant. He becomes convinced that the secret lies in the very fluids of the human body, specifically in urine. Not just a small sample either. He begins collecting it in large quantities, gallons at a time, from local soldiers and households, storing it in great barrels in the corner of his workshop. Day after day, he distills and boils the urine down. The smell is heavy, the vapors thick, and eye stinging. He reduces it first to a syrup, then a tar, and eventually, after endless hours of careful heating, a strange white vapor begins to rise, followed by faintly glowing drops that collect on the lid of his distillation vessel. He has created something new, something luminous. He calls it cold fire. We know it today as phosphorus, the first element ever isolated by chemical means. A marvel, yes, but not the gold he'd hoped for. Brand is not alone in his pursuits. across Europe. Others chased similar dreams. George Starkey in England, Michael Sandovogius in Poland, Paracelsus, whose ideas straddled medicine and mysticism, had laid much of the philosophical groundwork a century earlier. Each man believes he may be close. Each man is, in his own way, lost. Back in Hamburg, Brand tries to keep his discovery secret, hoping it might yet bring him wealth. But secrets, like vapors, tend to escape. Soon others are replicating the experiment. First in Dresden, then in London. The shimmering element, once guarded in shadow, becomes public. And Brand, he slips into obscurity, having gained no riches from his glowing droplets. The fortune he poured into this pursuit, the time, the money, the dignity, is gone. There were others who ventured down similar paths, and many who were burned by them. Some bankrupted themselves chasing the promise of gold. Some poisoned themselves slowly with mercury and arsenic, substances common in alchemical formulas. Some lost social standing, mocked for their strange behaviors and failed results. And some simply disappeared from record, their hopes leaving only faded ink and broken retorts behind. These were not madmen, not entirely. They were thinkers caught between centuries, between belief and reason, mystery and method. And in that hazy twilight, they sought the eternal from the mortal, the perfect from the impure. So what became of Henrik Brand? History does not record his final days, but you can imagine him, older now, alone in his lab, the barrels gone dry, the flames cold. He watches his once guarded elements spread across Europe, used by others in fireworks, in poisons, in war, and still no gold, no philosopher's stone, no elixir, only glowing ash. Even in failure, though something remained, his obsession, uncomfortable as it was, pushed the boundaries of science forward. The glow that lit his fingers in the dark would someday help fuel the world. Rest in the quiet knowledge that even strange, lonely work can leave a spark. The next segment will explore the coded culture of alchemy, its sacred diagrams, elemental riddles, and mysterious rituals. Segment 3, Bottles of Dust and Smoke, Alchemy's Lingering Mysteries, a quiet unraveling of the cryptic world behind alchemical manuscripts, ritual practice, and symbolic transformation. Now that we've walked through the noxious workspaces and desperate dreams of the alchemists themselves, it's time to slip deeper into the heart of their hidden language. Imagine a quiet study by candlelight. You sit alone, hunched over a thick tome, bound in cracked leather. The pages are stiff, browned with age, and scrawled with curious diagrams, circles within circles, dragons devouring their tails, men with wings and stars for eyes. You aren't meant to understand it at first glance. That's the point. This is the world of symbolic alchemy, where truth is not spoken, but veiled in image, metaphor, and code. Alchemy wasn't merely about substances. It was a philosophy, a worldview, a transformation of self as much as of metal. And so, its practitioners shrouded their knowledge in symbols and riddles, not only to guard secrets from the uninitiated, but because they believed that the truth of the universe was too powerful to be stated plainly. Instead of lead or gold, they used planetary names: Saturn for lead, Sol for gold, Luna for silver. The alchemical texts read like strange poems. When the king weds the white queen under the sign of Mars, then shall the red lion rise. It was both science and scripture, meant to be studied, not consumed. And these books, many of which survive, weren't hidden in the shadows as much as they were ignored by those who lacked the patience to interpret them. You can still see them today in museum libraries, their pages filled with careful Latin prose, interrupted only by the sudden appearance of a man with the head of a bird, or a lion sprouting flowers from its back. Some rituals were literal, controlled burning of sulfur, slow distillations, mixing of copper and mercury under moonlight. Others were entirely symbolic, Alchemists often spoke of putrefaction, a stage in which a substance, or soul, was allowed to rot and blacken, only to be reborn. It echoed religious themes: death and resurrection, descent and ascension. Laboratories were structured like temples, tools were aligned with planetary forces. Even the most basic act, heating a substance, was sometimes done according to the phases of the moon. The scientific process was wrapped tightly in ritual, and still, it was grounded in practice. Hidden within all the mysticism were real chemical operations, precursors to more modern processes like distillation and sublimation. They worked without modern theory but stumbled toward real discoveries. For every delusion there was a drop of truth. Some of the most influential alchemists remain anonymous, or cloaked behind pseudonyms. One such figure was the mysterious soothe, who wrote complex texts on refining metals and acids in the 13th century. Another was the cosmopolite, whose identity was never confirmed, but whose works were copied for centuries. And then there's the Emerald Tablet, a brief, cryptic text attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus. It contains the famous line, "As above, so below." What does it mean? Entire schools of alchemists debated that for centuries. Alchemy crossed continents. Chinese, Indian, Arabic, and European traditions each developed their own symbols, practices, and theories, sometimes overlapping, sometimes isolated, but always mysterious. Even today, archaeologists occasionally uncover alchemical glassware buried beneath the ruins of old workshops. Distillation flasks, crucibles, stained vials sealed with wax. Some are labeled in Latin, others bear cryptic markings. Many contained nothing more than gray powder or long evaporated residue. And yet, one can't help but wonder what was once inside. What dreams were boiled away in that bottle? What formulas were lost when a fire went out too early or a page was smeared by careless hands? We'll never know all of it, but we can admire the persistence, the quiet, repetitive devotion to a strange science that refused to separate the world of matter from the world of meaning. And so we return the book to the shelf, we blow out the candle, we leave behind the symbols and sigils, content to let some mysteries remain. In our next segment, we'll leave the smoky lab behind and walk down the polished corridors of power. The lives of those who funded the alchemists, flaunted their strange sciences at court, and dabbled in transformation from a safe and distant height. A gentle arrival. Picture yourself stepping through a pair of tall, cedarwood doors, freshly oiled so they open without a squeal. A hush greets you on the other side. The kind of hush that suggests not emptiness but expectation. Overhead ribbed vaults cradle the air like cupped hands. Beeswax tapers glow in iron sconces, their flames steady, giving the hall a warm, honey-colored cast. You pause, letting your eyes wander across polished flagstones. Somewhere far behind these walls, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer still rings, and in distant alleys, merchants shout over vegetable stalls. But here, those sounds arrive only as a faint vibration, a reminder of a world you've temporarily left behind. Take a slow breath. The air is subtly fragrant, orange blossom water, crushed rosemary, the barest trace of myrrh, scents chosen not for their strength but their grace. Soft soles brush over the stone as courtiers glide past. Their conversations, a low murmur, syllables merging into a single silken river of sound. In this place, knowledge is currency, but only if it shimmers. And so, the sciences displayed here must be beautiful, mysterious, and, above all, impressive at a glance. Welcome to the realm of court sorcery. One alchemy is a status symbol. To understand why rulers courted alchemists, imagine the politics of prestige in an age when divine right still underpinned every throne. Kings claimed God had chosen them. Emperors styled themselves the apex of a celestial order. Display mattered. Ceremonial robes mattered. Libraries stocked with rare manuscripts mattered. An alchemist? especially one rumored to possess a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone, wasn't merely an employee. He was an ornament of legitimacy. If a sovereign could command miracles of transmutation, surely heaven smiled on his reign. But it was safer, of course, to outsource the miracle. Noble fingers remained unscarred by mercury. Royal lungs never filled with arsenic fumes. The danger, the drudgery, the inevitable failures, those belonged to the practitioner. Success, if ever it came, would adorn the crown. Thus, across Europe, and indeed far beyond, courts cultivated reputations as havens for hidden wisdom. Glass alembics gleamed beside gold relics. Retorts sat on tables next to jewel chalices. It was less a laboratory than a stage set, less a workshop than an echo chamber designed to amplify wonder. To a gallery of patrons, Rudolf II of Prague, perhaps the most famous collector of arcane experts, was Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor at the turn of the 17th century. In the Hrodkany castle overlooking Prague, he gathered astrologers and visionaries, treating them with the same reverence he gave his to John Dee arrived from England bearing star charts and angelic alphabets. Edward Kelly followed, promising the transmutation of metals. Tycho Brahe came with painstaking astronomical tables. Rudolf funded them all, sometimes lavishly, sometimes fitfully, his enthusiasm waxing and waning with the moon. His palace became a labyrinth of curiosity cabinets, narwhal tusks mistaken for unicorn horns, automata that bowed when wound by hidden gears, fossilized ammonites arranged like spiral galaxies inside glass. Visitors described it as half museum, half sanctuary, half menagerie, fractions blurring because language itself faltered in the face of such abundance. Did Rudolf ever hold real gold conjured from lead? Probably not, but he believed, at least intermittently, and that belief burnished his mystique. Catherine de' Medici in France across the Rhine, Catherine de' Medici, Queen Consort, then Queen Mother of France, kept her own circle of astrologers and alchemical advisors. She consulted the celebrated seer Nostradamus for horoscopes. Her Parfumia la Florentin doubled as an experimental chemist mixing scented oils and, rumor whispered, subtle poisons. For Catherine, knowledge was a weapon. If a carefully timed prediction unnerved a political rival or a cryptic talisman inspired awe among courtiers, so much the better. She ruled through fear and fascination in equal measure, and alchemy, half shrouded in sacred geometry, half anchored in bitter metallic fumes, was ideally suited to both. The Ottoman and Mughal courts beyond Europe, in Istanbul and Agra, sultans and emperors funded their own blend of esoteric inquiry. Ottoman workshops produced delicate glassware for distilling rosewater, prized in both perfumery and medicine. Mughal emperors sponsored alchemical treatises weaving Ayurvedic traditions into Persian Arabic texts, aiming to strengthen imperial health and longevity. Here as in Europe, results mattered less than spectacle. A flask glowing faintly under lamplight became proof of imperial favor with the unseen realms. Louis XIV, even the meticulously choreographed court of Louis XIV had room for controlled wonder. The Sun King's personal laboratory at Versailles was stocked with brass instruments and gleaming glass for demonstrations. Yet Louis seldom ventured inside. He preferred reports delivered on parchment, tidy, decipherable, free of noxious odors. 3 Daily life of a palace alchemist stepped through a discreet wooden door tucked behind a tapestry, and you'll find a palace laboratory. It is larger than the basement shops of common alchemists. Better lit, swept daily. Shelves hold glazed jars labeled in a graceful secretariat hand. Vitriol. Salomoniac Nita, a palace steward, oversees supplies. Charcoal arrives in neat sacks, not smoky cups. Vinegar is aged in sealed barrels. The alchemist wears linen of decent quality, laundered regularly. Those stains, stubborn and yellow, still bloom across the cuffs. His day starts at dawn with a brief audience in an antechamber. court secretaries noting requests from the sovereign, an elixir for vitality, perhaps, or a dye of particularly vivid purple destined for a royal robe. The demands are rarely realistic, but they are delivered politely, almost musically, as though ordering a new fountain or a summer pavilion. After the meeting, the alchemist retreats to his furnace. He adjusts copper vents with gloved hands. He inspects glassware for hairline cracks. He stirs solutions with cedar rods, the scent of the wood mingling with sulfur. Servants stand ready to fetch water, sand, coal. If mercury must be weighed, they would draw to a safe distance, leaving the master to lift the shimmering bead with feather-light tweezers. Midday brings a simple meal: lentil soup, a small loaf, perhaps olives, served on a wooden tray to avoid contaminating noble porcelain. Conversation is minimal. The alchemist measures, records, and waits. So many hours here are spent quietly watching, a color shift from straw yellow to ochre, a faint ring of crystals forming on a beaker's lip, a single bubble rising through viscous tar. Evening may bring a summons. A prince wants a demonstration for visiting dignitaries. The alchemist must bottle something aromatic, or produce a powder that bursts into green flame. Success provokes polite applause. Failure, a frosty silence. No scolding, not at first. Just the lingering sense that tomorrow's funding depends on tonight's display. And when the palace sleeps, the laboratory glows on, lamplight bending through curved glass. The alchemist checks the sandbath one last time, banks the furnace, writes a final line in his ledger, and retires to a modest chamber adjoining the workshop. Outside, fountains tinkle under moonlight. Inside, his ears still ring with the faint hiss of cooling metal. For the politics of Wonder Court sorcery thrived on ambiguity. A demonstration needed to seem miraculous, but never so miraculous as to threaten established theology. If an experiment went awry, vapors discolored the ceiling, or a retort cracked with a sharp report, the failure was carefully reframed as an intermediate stage or a necessary recalibration. Financiers seldom attended to the fine print. They remembered only the flash of color or the scent of cinnamon-tinged smoke. For many, that was enough. Still, patronage could be fickle. An eclipse mispredicted by an astrologer might sour a queen's trust. A succession crisis could drain treasure chests, leaving little silver for secret laboratories. Wars demanded cannon, not crucibles. Illness might claim a patron in the night, replacing a tolerant ruler with a skeptical air. Some alchemists navigated the turbulence with graceful diplomacy. They prepared tinctures that doubled as perfumes, ensuring a place in courtly routines. They penned flattering horoscopes that aligned princely births with auspicious planetary conjunctions. They offered plausible medical advice, herbal balms for gout, syrups for insomnia, grounding their more fantastic claims in recognizable utility. Others fared poorly. Records tell of practitioners expelled for false promises, a polite phrase that spares us darker details. A few faced trial for sorcery, though convictions were rare. More often they languished in debtors' prisons, having spent royal stipends on copper filings and rare resins without conjuring a single coin of gold. Yet in the aggregate, these successes and failures sustained the palace mystique. The possibility of alchemical triumph, however remote, kept nobles funding furnaces year after year. Better to risk a little silver on potential transmutation than to cede the glory to a rival court. 5 performances behind closed doors. Let us linger a moment at an evening demonstration. A small salon, walls paneled in walnut, tapestries muffling echoes. A semicircle of high-backed chairs faces a table draped in embroidered silk. Candles flicker in crystal sconces, their flames doubled in the facets. The alchemist enters, bowing just enough to show humility but not so deeply as to seem subservient. His assistant, often a young adult page, carries a lacquered case of instruments, a polished glass sphere, a copper coil, a shallow porcelain dish. Guests lean forward as the demonstration begins. A powder sprinkled into a dish ignites with a soft whoosh, blossoming into green flame, the hue of spring leaves under moonlight. There is a collective intake of breath, then a rustle of approval, fans fluttering, cuffs brushing. Next, the glass sphere fills with swirling vapors. The alchemist tilts it under candlelight, revealing shimmering motes dancing within. Some call it celestial dust. Others think it's simple, metallic filings suspended in the spirit of wine. No matter. The point is wonder, not comprehension. Finally, a metal rod dipped into a beaker emerges, coated in a thin layer of what appears to be silver. The transformation is instantaneous, or so it seems under lamplight. Is it real? Perhaps it is merely tin or quicksilver amalgam flashing on the surface. Audience members cannot tell, and so they applaud, satisfied that, for tonight, they have witnessed the edge of the impossible. Wine is poured. Musicians begin a soft melody. Conversation turns to politics, poetry, and, inevitably, to rumors of other courts, other miracles. The alchemist withdraws, paid coin and cautious smiles, already calculating what supplies tomorrow's stipend might cover. 6. When patronage fades. Not every ruler remained enchanted. England's King James, I grew suspicious of charlatans after expansive failures. Spain's Philip II funneled resources into more tangible artillery. Even Rudolph II, the great collector, eventually faced imperial debts and diminishing patience among his advisors. Some courts shuttered laboratories altogether. Retorts went cold. Glass cracked in disuse. Manuscripts were boxed and forgotten in damp archives. Alchemists scattered, some to smaller courts, others to city guilds, a few to quiet rural parishes where they served as apothecaries. Yet the knowledge they carried did not disappear when they unpacked their equipment in new towns. Curious apprentices gathered. Techniques were taught, refined, written down in plainer language. Slowly, quietly, the once rarefied spectacle became the seat of professional chemistry. 7. Picture once more the stark difference between the two worlds we have visited so far in this tale. The basement laboratory. Damp, cramped, flickering. Apprentices coughing over vinegar fumes. Nails stained black by silver nitrate. Dreams of gold, hunger for success, and the gnawing chill of never knowing if tomorrow's meal will arrive. The palace salon. Warm, airy, perfumed. Velvet gowns brushing polished floor. Gold leaf catching lamplight on carved cornices. Here the same dreams float, but cushioned by luxury. Failure stings, but rarely starves. And yet, the emotional stakes are strangely similar. Expectation, pressure, uncertainty. The cellar alchemist fears destitution. The court alchemist fears disgrace. Both fear the yawning possibility that transmutation is, after all, an illusion. 8. A soft reflection. Allow yourself a slow breath. Feel how distant both worlds are from your modern life, and yet how familiar the human patterns remain. Ambition still seeks patrons. Knowledge still courts prestige. Laboratories, whether in basements or behind brocade, still chase transformations, though today we call them innovations. It is comforting, in a quiet way, to realize that greatness often grows from repetition, from patient measurement, from evenings spent adjusting valves and scribbling numbers. Even the grandest spectacle at court began with someone grinding powder into finer and finer dust. And when reputations fade and tapestries decay, the procedures, the quietly perfected techniques, survive. They slip into textbooks, then classrooms, then research papers, shedding their coats of mystery for the plain garb of protocol. 9. A gentle exit. The candles in our imagined salon have burned low. Wax puddles around the bases like melted marble. Courtiers drift away, their shoes whispering over stone as they seek supper or song. The alchemist stands alone for a moment, listening to the last notes of the harp fade into silence. You, too, may step back from the scene. Let the perfume of cedar oil and orange blossom fall away. Let the polished corridors dissolve into shadow. Ahead, another door waits, leading us into a quieter, broader vista. The slow evolution from court sorcery to modern science. Segment 5. After the Ashes, how alchemy quietly became chemistry, a soft reflection on how the dreams, tools, and failures of alchemists slowly transformed into modern science. As the last embers of the furnace dim and the final experiment settles into stillness, it is tempting to believe that alchemy simply ended, that it faded into the obscurity of old manuscripts and abandoned cellars, dismissed as a failed pseudoscience. But the truth is more gentle and more interesting. Alchemy did not die in fire or mockery. It simply changed its clothes. It set aside its mystic robes for a white lab coat. It swapped dragons and hermetic circles for periodic tables and peer review. But its essence, the patient pursuit of hidden truths, the careful watching and waiting, the belief that something could become something else, remained. This final segment isn't about dramatic discovery. It's about slow transformation, about how the quiet persistence of alchemists, their tedious rituals and coded knowledge, laid the foundation for what would one day be known as chemistry. Let's trace that journey softly together. Imagine you're in Europe in the 1600s. The 30 Years' War is still fresh in memory. Cities are rebuilding. Knowledge is still copied by hand in some places. And yet something is stirring. A shift is happening in the language of knowledge. Where once one might have read that the black dragon must devour the red king under the stars, you now find clearer phrases like copper nitrate reacts violently with ammonia. The old alchemical texts are still consulted, still respected in some circles. But younger scholars are asking different questions. They want repeatable results, measurable changes, simpler explanations. And so, alchemy begins to dissolve into something new, not overnight, not in any one place, but gradually, across laboratories, universities, and royal courts. The dream of transmutation becomes a curiosity, and method becomes king. Still, it's important to remember, this change did not come from outside. It came from within. Many of the earliest chemists were trained as alchemists. They didn't reject their roots. They evolved them. The 17th century brought new tools, microscopes, barometers, the air pump. These instruments offered something that alchemy never could. Proof, when you could see tiny organisms under a lens, or weigh gases that had no smell. Suddenly the invisible became real. The mystery didn't disappear, but it could now be measured. Robert Boyle, for instance, was deeply interested in alchemy. He studied the works of alchemists who came before him. He believed in the possibility of transmutation, but he also believed in the power of careful observation. His book, The Skeptical Chemist, marked a shift. Chemistry would be built not on secret codes, but on evidence and experimentation. And yet, Boyle still kept a personal interest in the philosopher's stone. He wasn't dismissing alchemy, he was refining it. Others followed. Antoine Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry, introduced a system of chemical nomenclature, finally breaking substances down by element, not essence. He identified and named oxygen and hydrogen, and helped bury the old theory of phlogiston, a concept that had attempted to explain combustion for decades. He was clear, methodical, and careful, and still, the ghost of alchemy lingered in the background. Even today, the tools of alchemy are still with us. Every chemistry lab, no matter how modern, carries echoes of its ancestor. The beaker, the crucible, the retort, the distillation flask, these were once handled by candlelight, now by halogen bulbs. The alembic, a signature piece of alchemical glassware with its long, spiraling neck and collection flask, is the ancestor of modern distillation columns. The process, heating, vaporizing, condensing, remains the same. The furnace, too, survives, in more controlled, more precise forms. But the heart of it, a chamber of transformation, is the same as it was when alchemists believed they were purifying base matter into something divine. Even the language has changed slowly. Where once we spoke of essences and quintessence, we now speak of compounds and molecular structures. But they both attempt to answer the same question. What is this made of? And what can it become? You might be tempted to think that modern scientists are far more grounded than their mystical predecessors. But if you look closely, you'll see that we are still transmuting. Not metals, necessarily, but genes, materials, elements. We've learned to turn carbon into diamonds, salt water into drinkable water, crude oil into medicine. We've split the atom, rearranged DNA, created synthetic life. Things that would have seemed more magical than any philosopher's stone to a medieval alchemist. In nuclear reactors, we have even managed to turn lead into gold, albeit in trace amounts, at enormous cost, and with little practical application. But it has been done. In this way, the alchemist's dream never died. It just got better tools. And what are the alchemists themselves? They may not be household names. Their discoveries are not celebrated in textbooks, but they are part of the lineage. Without them, Boyle would have had no texts to revise. Lavoisier would not have had theories to refute. The very idea of transformation, that materials could become something new, might never have taken root. They worked in isolation, in poverty, often in vain. But they asked questions no one else was asking. They observed. They recorded. They believed in the possibility of change, not just in matter, but in self. Because for many alchemists, the work was not just about gold. It was about purifying the soul, about becoming better through discipline, study, and humility. That human longing for betterment, for transcendence, is as alive now as ever. So as we come to the end of this long, smoky corridor through the history of alchemy, let us pause and look around one final time. The walls are no longer lined with cryptic manuscripts, but with data. The flasks are labeled with precise chemical names, not poetic titles. But the spirit of inquiry has never left. The alchemist's lab has become the scientist's lab. The workbench remains. The questions remain. The hope remains. And in that stillness, we find something oddly comforting. That even the most mysterious pursuits can become clear. That even centuries of failure can lead to understanding. That from dust, smoke, and confusion, we've built something enduring. Chemistry, born from the ashes of forgotten fires. So now, as your thoughts begin to slow and your breathing softens, let these final reflections settle gently into your mind. You are not in a lab. You are not grinding minerals or whispering over mercury. You are safe. Somewhere, someone once lit a flame that you now benefit from. Their strange little rituals, repeating measurements, boiling metals, mixing oils, became your medicines, your plastics, your electricity. Their world was dark, slow, and uncertain. But a goddess here. And now, with the soft hum of modern life around you, you can let go, let the transformation complete. From curiosity to comfort, from thinking to dreaming,